Introduce. Thank you. Agrima.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
A very good evening to one and welcome to online lecture series brought to you by Intersections Banaras Hindu University. Intersections B.H.U is an informal academic platform under the aegis of Faculty of Arts, Banaras Hindu University. The purpose of this online lecture series is to address young minds of scholars, academicians, and mostly PG students, and bring about an awareness of the recent and ongoing studies in the sphere of academics. Today we have among us Dr. Niladri Chatterjee, who is currently working as a professor in the Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Chatterjee, who is a very eminent scholar and speaker in the field of gender and queer studies. A recipient of Fulbright Scholarship and British Council Charles Wallace Fellowship, he has been teaching a course in gender studies at his university since 2009 and has co-edited The Muffled Heart, Stories of the Disempowered Male, contributed to the American Isherwood, and so on. He has reviewed for gay and lesbian reviews worldwide, US. Other than this, he has also authored the book Androgyny and Female Impersonation in India, Nari Bhav, along with Tutun Mukherjee. Recently, his novel The Scholar was published in print. He is also published in the journal American Notes and Queries, Intersections, The Wire, and many other reputed platforms. He also runs a Facebook group called New Gender Studies, which has over 14,820 members. Being an active scholar, academician, and a passionate educator, he has been giving talks on the subject for more than 20 years, and especially throughout this lockdown period. Today he will be speaking on the topic Love is Love, disciplining queerness through social media. Taking no more, I, Agrima Mishra, on behalf of Banaras Hindu University, welcome you, sir. Before starting, here are some general housekeeping rules for the audience. It is requested to keep their microphones off throughout and not to share screen. Kindly write your questions and observations in the chat box now. All the questions shall be read out by me in the chronological order. Now the platform is all yours, sir. Welcome, sir.
Okay, Niladri, we have been engaging and talking past many days about these issues. Let's start with the same concern that you had a few days before when you were attending a baby, right? And you found that when they were talking about the concern or the issues related to women in pandemic, were generally addressing only heterosexual women, right? So it seems to them that when we think of a woman as a, we only think heterosexual women, no other categories as well. So this is one thing like where I want you to pick it up, and then two more subsequent observations, and which I want you to follow it up, views. The one is that there was a huge debate. I'm talking about the same two books. Talking about Sullivan and Jagose, that lesbian and gay studies as a discipline when it was formed, or it was done. And then we had a queer studies as well, right? So there was a contestation that either shall we go for lesbian and gay studies, go for queer studies, and then when this queering of lesbian and gay studies has been the subject of, like, it was violently debated, and some scholars, they claimed that it radically erodes, I'm quoting, the last traces of an oppressive gender coherence. other eminent scholars says that it is a pansexuality as reactionary, even unfeminist, right? So, and recently, like, I'm not sure. I mean, you have been working and engaging with these things. You can tell me better. That a scale that this field is now also being domesticated, right? It is also being normally constructed. A very idea that it will open up the possibilities is somewhere in danger or is in crisis. So, take now.
Thank you so much, Vivek, for the questions. Thanks also to this absolutely wonderful group that has been formed at Benares in the university. And thank you for inviting me, Vivek, to speak to you all today. I was very excited to be here. And now finally I am here and I'm very happy. I am particularly pleased that you posed the three questions that you did because that allows me a way to approach what I say. And of course, later on we can take more questions. First question was about this webinar that I recently attended, which was supposedly about women, but in paper after paper after paper, it turned out that it wasn't just women either. It was about heterosexual women who are at home and who are presumably married. So we are a very narrow kind of segment of who we recognize as women, heterosexual women, married. So the only thing that was talked about was basically domestic violence. So it was paper after paper after paper on domestic violence. And what I felt doing was, and this I thought was a real concern for me, is that although the motive for the seminar seemed to be feminist, but it sort of patriarchal because I found that many people who perhaps would want to identify as women, they left out. Identified three such segments. I identified women who are a part of the ASHA or women who are ASHA. Now, many of you may already ASHA, accredited social health activists. These women are appointed by Gram Panchayat and they basically go from door to door. Normal times they go door to door sort of spreading information about health issues. But now, of course, the ASHA have been asked to spread awareness regarding COVID-19. But what actually became a real problem is that, first of all, these men were clearly dissatisfied with the kind of money that they I wonder that even after 30 years of queer theory, this is the one thing that still doesn't seem to have changed. In the popular patriarchal perception, sorry about the alliteration, uh, women still who are born with a vagina, those who are heterosexual, and those who are married, and of course those who are mother. I heard a lot about wonderfully glorious motherhood is. And of course, I did not talk about lesbians, but yes, lesbians were left out as well. So it was these multiple exclusions, and this is exactly what Judith Butler talks about in Gender Trouble, is that you cannot construct a category of woman where so many kinds of women are being left out. So I felt that there seems to be now a real battle, completely uncontrolled battle that is raging between what I call, not I call, but what is now referred to as the turf, that is various exclusionary radical feminists. People like Sheila Jeffries, people like Germaine Greer, people even like J.K. Rowling, who believe that trans women have got no right to call themselves women. And so they are one group, and then you've got the queer feminists who are appalled by this kind of exclusionary version of feminism, because what queer theory did is that it actually expanded the domain of feminism. It made feminism far more generous, and now we seem to be heading in the opposite direction, where feminism is being kind of constricted. The second question that you asked is the one about this kind of some gay and lesbian activists believe that queer theory is actually doing a lot of harm. There are feminists who say that queer theory is doing a lot of harm. And Judith Butler, when her book Gender Trouble came out, herself was subjected to a lot of abuse because there are some kind of feminists who believe that post-structuralism is actually not very helpful. They believe that sort of if you situate a kind of politics only on the body, by which they meant the biological natal body. So some feminists clearly seem to be having a lot of faith, and they seem to believe that the biological body can be a firm foundation for any kind of politics. They believe that placing your politics on the natal body is the only way forward. And what queer theory is doing is just sort of muddying the waters. Um, I simply don't know how to counter that, because I believe that queer theory is not doing that at all. If anything, queer theory is actually making feminism far more helpful. I can personally tell you that had Judith Butler not happened, I myself perhaps would not have been a feminist. So it was Judith Butler's book which made me into a feminist. So I believe that what queer theory has done is far from diluting feminism. Queer theory has actually expanded the scope of feminism. That is what I absolutely believe in. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your third question, Vivek.
Yes, I was talking about the concern of uh, being queer studies being domesticated, right?
Oh, right. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Well, I that is exactly what I was. This paper was not paper. I mean, this presentation was going to be on. So that I think allows me to now actually get into what I was going to say: the domestication of queer studies. And I think yes, it is a real problem because I think that. There is a way in which we have already begun to understand queer theory as, again, something that is grounded on the body. And that is something, there is almost the body constantly comes up as this sort of very firm and sure foundation on which politics can be constructed. I'm not terribly sure if that is very helpful in this day and age. And I think that queer theory has been profoundly affected, and I think feminism has been radically affected and very positively affected by transgender studies, because I think what transgender studies has done once and for all is to completely demolish the myth of the biological sex. That is something that transgender studies has done very, very successfully, I personally think. But the gentrification, the domestication of queer theory is a real problem. And I think, I was talking about it at another webinar very recently, where I said that patriarchy is I say this everywhere. Patriarchy is a drug resistant virus. It is a constantly mutating drug resistant virus. So patriarchy will, whenever patriarchy finds that feminism is beginning to find a way to counter patriarchy, patriarchy will find a way to sort of smuggle itself in and to subvert the feminist project. And the domestication, the gentrification of queer studies is, I think, very much a step in that direction. So this is where queer theory runs the risk of becoming patriarchal. And how do we prevent that from happening? Well, we constantly need to be aware of how normativities are creeping into queer theory. So that is the one thing that we need to be very, very careful about. Because there is a way in which the term queer is becoming kind of normatized to talk about a particular kind of identity, whether it is a sexual identity or a gender identity, and less about queer as a politics. And I think we really have to reclaim the term queer as a politics, as a practice, not necessarily as a gender identity or a sexual identity. So those are the things that I think we should be very, very vigilant about. So maybe now we can start having the questions.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful answer. So then we move on to the next question by Avyaputri Sthiti Pragyan. Sir, are texts lesbian if neither author nor content are explicitly lesbian? If so, can we justify this through the lens of negative capability by John Keats? If no, why?
I'm sorry, you'd have to repeat that question again. I didn't quite get it.
Sir, are texts lesbian if neither author nor content are explicitly lesbian? If so, can we
Ah,
justify this through the lens of negative capability by John Keats? If no, why?
okay. Sure. I mean, I think, well, I'm not terribly sure how John Keats comes into it, because I think what John Keats was talking about, if I remember, is, how to erase your own identity when you're writing poetry. So that I think is what John Keats was talking about, is how to erase your own identity when you're creating art. Um, but over here, I think that the question seems to be slightly different. It is about, can we call a text lesbian if we don't know whether the author is lesbian or not, and if there isn't any overtly lesbian content. Well, I think that you can still, well, this is what queer theory does, doesn't it? Because queer theory is a politics of reading. And yes, you can certainly, even if you don't want to call it, see, there is a way in which we have now begun to understand lesbian, which I think is very limiting. Because if you look at the history of the term lesbian, then you will find that there used to be a time in the US when women would identify themselves as lesbian, not because they were attracted to other women, but as a political category. So, therefore, to be a lesbian basically meant that I am comfortable or I wish to belong in a society of women, which does not in any way indicate the particular person's sexual desires. So then there was a way in which you could be politically lesbian without being sexually attracted to other women, right? So if we can take that broader definition of lesbian, lesbian not as a sexual orientation, but lesbian as a politics, then we can certainly look at books which are not ostensibly authored by lesbian women, or books that have a lesbian that don't have a lesbian plot. We can still read them as lesbian, but that lesbianism can be political lesbianism as opposed to the kind of sexual lesbianism that we are used to understanding. So maybe we should broaden the applicability of the term lesbian. Sure.
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Kasturi Das. So, do you think that it's enough to define someone's sexuality only on the basis of their gender, of their sexual object choice? That is, only by their sexual orientation, when we have a vast range of dimensions regarding sexual practices, example, the diverse ways, varieties of preferences for different erogenous zones, varieties of meanings and ideas invested in sex by different people, etc. She continues, from the very moment of birth, an infant's body becomes a locus for play of power. As the biomedical discourses try to define or construct the body by using particular categories called male or female, and the infant is expected to perform accordingly. So, don't you think, even before stepping into the order of language and culture, the infant is already made to take a certain subject position in terms of the infant's body? Isn't a sexed body already a subject position for the infant? Or is it just an instrument for the subjectivities that the infant will have to take up later to play out?
Oh, wow, wow. See, this is exactly this is exactly why I said that I'm not going to give a set lecture, but I'll take questions. It is because of questions like this. I'm completely in agreement with you. I think that the baby is actually sexed. If I use sexing as a verb, then the baby is actually sexed without the baby's consent. The baby is given a gender again without the baby's consent, and the baby for the rest of its life has to then conform to the category that has been set for it. So I'm in absolute agreement with them, and which is why when people ask me how do we get rid of patriarchy, how do we get rid of gender binary, I say, well, a good place to start maybe would be to stop saying to people when you have a child whether it is a boy or a girl, maybe, and not to have that written in the birth certificate either. So that once the baby is of a certain age where the baby understands what is sex, understands what is gender, then the baby can make their own choice and to basically say, I want to gender present as a man, or I want to gender present as a woman. But that should be left to the baby. It should not be predetermined by patriarchy. So that point is entirely taken. The first part of the question, whether sexual identity this particular political position. So I think that it is completely limiting to label people on the basis of their gender and their sexuality. Your point is absolutely taken. And then I think that we should be more comfortable with the idea of our sexual attractions or sexual desires gravitating in unpredictable ways. So I think that these are the ways in which we can perhaps start to imagine an identity that is marked by change, not by stability, because stability ultimately is something that patriarchy loves.
Thank you so much, sir. So, Chandragala Ghosh asks, when one says that one is a feminist, is this supposed to include fighting for the rights of the people living under the umbrella term, as they are considered to be the other as well?
Yes. I think that once upon a time, well, I don't think that this was, I think there is something that everybody needs to look at. This is a document that not many of us think about, but I would certainly recommend that we look at it. This is the Kombahi River Collective. Now, the Kombahi River Collective is, I think, very important because this was written sometime in 1977, I think. And even there in that Kombahi River Collective, there is clearly a plea that is being made for intersectionality. So now that, after Kimberly Crenshaw, we now understand the term intersectional feminism as the big buzz thing. But remember that intersectionality, even if it didn't have that name, it was already there in the 1970s. So, what I would really wish to therefore say is that you are, I mean, at least I personally believe that I am not a feminist if I think that my concern is only with oppression that is gendered, oppression that is sexualized, if I limit myself to those only to those axes or structures of oppression, then I believe that I am not being sufficiently feminist. My feminism should include oppressions that are happening also through the structures of race, through the structures of class, caste, regionalism, language, and ableism, and many other such structures of oppression. So I believe that my preferred kind of feminism is intersectional feminism, which takes on board structures of oppression that may not ostensibly be either gendered or sexual.
Thank you so much, sir.
So,
Sir,
she
she
adds,
adds,
so right
sir,
from the
right from
moment
the
we are
moment we are
defining the
defining the
umbrella
umbrella
sexual
sexual
identities as
identities as
queer,
queer,
as you said,
as you
we are
said, we are
accepting the
accepting the
idea that
idea
it
that
is
it is
literally
literally
something
something
strange,
strange,
something out of
something
the
out of the
ordinary.
ordinary.
Do you
Do
think
you
that
think that
this might
this
be a
might be
reason
a
for
reason for
people
people
to be
to
so
be so
resistant to the
resistant to the
community as a
community
whole?
as a whole?
Okay. That's funny because just this morning, and I think if well, I think Vivek has my email address, so I can forward Vivek an email that I wrote just this morning to somebody who asked me this exact same question, because people still, because this particular person who wrote an email to me said that is queerness natural? Like a boy's attraction to a girl is natural. So you can see that there is a major confusion. The person confused queerness with sexual desire, and there's this huge mess that is going on in the head. So I very clearly, through the six particular bullets, I explained what queer theory is. So please let me explain that the term queer, as in strange or odd or bizarre, this is the way in which we normally understand the term queer. However, in February 1990, there was a new coinage of the term queer. There was a re-signification of the term queer that happened in February 1990, according to which the queer was no longer strange or odd or bizarre, but queer was a political position. Like you can be a communist, like you can be a Marxist, like you can be a socialist, like you can be a feminist, you can be queer. So therefore, queer became a political position. It has nothing to do, and I cannot repeat this often enough, it has nothing to do with your gender or your sexual orientation. So you can be supposedly heterosexual and you can still be politically queer, because queer is a politics, it is a political identity, it is not a gender or a sexual identity. It can be, but it need not be. So therefore, once we begin to understand queer as politics, not as a set fixed identity, I think it becomes easier for us to decide whether we wish to identify as queer or not. But
Thank you
that's
so
Thank you,
it.
so.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Saurav Saha. He writes, Sir, is there a need to categorize women, or how can we categorize those who project same sex desires, yet don't want themselves to be tagged or labeled as lesbians?
My simple answer would be, please don't categorize anybody without asking them or without in some way trying to find out which category they themselves claim. And I think it's very important for us to remember, because I was just having this sort of argument with somebody who is a fan of Jordan Peterson, and he believes that like Jordan Peterson, that there should be no legislation against me misgendering people. So there should be no law against my calling a trans woman he. And I tried to make him understand that that is actually an act of violence, but of course he didn't understand it. So therefore, my answer to your question is going to be, try and to find out what identity that particular person claims. It can very well be that a person perhaps gender presents as a woman, but person may say that I am gender presenting myself, but I do not claim to be a woman, or I'm not a woman. If the person says that they're not a woman, they're not a woman. So I think that we have now reached a point where we are claiming certain identities for ourselves. I think the respectful thing to do, I think the ethical thing to do, is when you are writing about someone, or when you're talking to someone, to try and find out what their identity is. Instead of running the risk of either misgendering them or in any way being violent through the way in which you apply a certain identity. So always ask.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, next question is by Swati Kanaya. She says, as we discuss gender and sexuality as academicians of humanities and social sciences, how distant are we from medical science? We read seminal texts like Judith Butler's, where she says gender is a social construct. But if we start looking at science, there's no evidence supporting it. I feel there is a big divide between the humanities and science in how we look at gender and the contentious issues stemming from it. How do we deal with this gap?
Oh God. Every question has been so brilliant so far. But again, this is a conversation that I had with not one but two doctors. Well, not doctors, but were two people who were engaged in sort of in the medical science, and they had watched one of my videos. And after watching my videos, they said, "Oh, Niladri, it was very nice." That video that you posted on YouTube. But I think you're making a mistake. I think biological sex does exist. So I said, really? Biological sex exists? Yes, biological sex exists. So I said, on what basis are you saying that biological sex exists? And as I knew what would happen, they immediately took recourse to, you guessed it, chromosome. So they said that, oh, you see, you must understand that, it is the Y chromosome that builds the penis, and it is the absence of the Y chromosome that builds the vagina. So you see that sex is chromosomal. And I said, really? Fantastic. So if sex is chromosomal, then answer me this. If today a pre-operative trans person, as a trans woman, and not even a pre-operative, she has had operations done on her upper body, but her lower body she has kept unoperated, which means that she has what we normally recognize as breast, but she has also retained her testicles, and she has also retained her penis. If this trans woman goes to a particular doctor for some urinary tract infection, say for example, then what will the doctor do? will the doctor basically refuse to see the trans woman because she gender presents as a woman, but she has a penis? Or is the person going to say, well, if you have a penis, then you can't wear a sari. Next time you should wear a shirt and trousers and come to my dispensary. What should the doctor do? Is the doctor basically going to tell the trans woman that yes, the rest of you may be a woman, but that bit between your legs that is male? How can you say that? So therefore, the penis in itself, and this is something that I've said many, many times, and I think I should say that over here as well. The penis in itself is not a male sexual organ. The vagina in itself is not a female sexual organ. They have been sexed male. They have been sexed female by the medical sciences, as you very rightly point out. And I think what the medical sciences really need to do, and this is something which my doctor friends also agree with me, that the medical sciences need to sit down with gender theorists. Okay, I don't know how much of the previous answer you got. So could you just remind me how much of it you got, and then I can start from there. I can resume from there. So
So you
where did
were
you lose me?
so you were explaining about urban queer and rural queer and how they are problematic categories.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Fantastic. I really hope not to get disconnected anymore. What we really have to understand is that when these categories are created, urban queer, rural queer, what that does is that this is exactly how patriarchy manages to smuggle itself into supposedly. We should try to keep the word queer as queer, because I think that is going to allow us a playing field that is going to be generous enough and expansive enough to accommodate all kinds of reading, all kinds of representation.
Thank you so much, sir. So next question we have is by Joyita Chaudhary.
Yes.
She says, how can we incorporate the idea of queer theory in children's learning and make them conscious, sensible about it?
I think that's a brilliant question. I think there are very, very simple ways of doing it. I think that, there are wonderfully gifted. Actually, thank you for giving me that idea, because I happen to be very good friends with somebody who writes children's books. So I can now suggest to her to create books that are going to somehow accommodate the queer into them. It's very easy to do. I think it's very easy to actually incorporate queer within children's literature. You have to be able to think of storylines. You have to be able to think of representations, drawings that one usually finds in children's books. You have to be able to think of plot lines and storylines and representations where identities are changing. And the children need to be told that these changing identities are nothing to be scared of. They are nothing to be terrified of. We all change our identities, and these changes should be celebrated. They should be welcomed in the same way that we celebrate and welcome a change of scene, or a change of clothes, or a change of cuisine. So therefore, change in identity should be incorporated into children's literature. It should be done on the basis of storyline as well as on the basis of representation, visual representation, drawing. Thank you so much for an idea. I must mention this to her.
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Anamika Saha. People are confused about the Hijra community. Can you please enlighten us the difference between Hijra community and a transgender? Also, when I had a talk with one of the members of the Gharana, and she said we don't include ourselves among those Hijra communities who demands individual rights. Are they in war among themselves, or is it the lack of knowledge that makes them resistant?
I don't know. I mean, I can't presume to know exactly what makes a certain person espouse the politics and what makes a person stay away from a politics. There can be various reasons for that. I cannot presume. I shouldn't assume. But what I can say for those who have problems understanding the Hijra community as such is that there are several very good writings that have now become available. But the one essay that I think I can refer you to, this is in a book that was co-edited by Arvind Narayan and Gautam Bhatt called Because I Have a Voice, Queer Politics in India. Please look at the essay by Ashwini Subhankar. Because in that essay by Ashwini Subhankar, she puts it very, very clearly that there are transgender people who do not identify as Hijra because of the very simple reason that the Hijra community, they have their own particular structure, they have their own particular hierarchies, they have their own particular language, they have their own particular customs. So therefore, the Hijra identity is a cultural identity, it is a professional identity, but the transgender identity is more like a gender identity. So yes, of course, the Hijra identity can be brought within the broad umbrella of the transgender identity. So, but not all transgender persons are Hijra. So I think these are the slight kind of distinctions that I think are necessary because these distinctions denote livelihood and denote particular culture. So yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is by Arnab Panda. How justified is the term queer? When we call something queer, there always remains the absent presence of something straight and normal against which some category is called queer. When the aim is to destabilize the heteronormativity of gender orientation, don't you think this term queer itself, in a way, is giving authentication to heterosexuality?
No, I think I have explained this before. So if this video is on YouTube, I would certainly recommend that you watch the video. I have very clearly explained that queer is a politics. It is not a gender identity. It is not a sexual identity. Queer is a political stance. So therefore, queer is a political position which was created in February 1990 to basically oppose all kinds of normativities. It is a kind of producing research work. It is a kind of producing knowledge which points out the normativities under which we are all struggling. So it has got, it is more like a politics. It may be a gender identity or a sexual identity, but it isn't necessarily so. So therefore, one can be heterosexual and one can be queer. I have already said it before, but anyway, I'm happy to repeat it again.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is by Sudiksha Singh. She writes, while feminism has to contend against the patriarchal order, lesbian, gay, queer has to push across the feminist and patriarchal positions. Do you agree with this statement? Moreover, she continues, notions like fluid identity, the otherness, experimental forms, and deconstructive freedom have given scope to what is generally referred to as queer theory and queer studies.
Yes, no, I don't think that, well, okay, so just because somebody is gay or lesbian, please remember, gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender, that does not automatically make them politically aware. Right? This is something that you have to understand. Just because you're a woman, you don't automatically become a feminist because feminism is something that you learn. Feminism is a politics that you inculcate. Feminism is a politics that you practice. In a similar way, just because somebody is gay, just because somebody is lesbian, does not automatically make their identity political. So therefore, queer politics is an identity that queer politics is a practice that you have to learn, you have to understand, you have to put in effect. And so I genuinely do not believe that a politically aware gay or lesbian person is going to be opposed to feminism. I genuinely don't believe that. Yes, it may have been the case a long time ago, when feminists believed that their struggles were only for heterosexual women, but that has changed completely. Well, I was going to say completely, but now, of course, there are a new kind of feminists, as I was talking about, who could basically say that we don't recognize trans women as women. Be that as it may, but I think if you leave aside the terms, that is to say, if you leave aside the trans exclusionary radical feminists, but there will be most feminists, and I think many feminists are actually going to say that gays and lesbians are actually a part of the feminist fight. The gays and lesbians, if they're politically aware, they are not going to be opposed to feminism. They will actually be helped by feminism. Because gays and lesbians and bisexuals and transgenders, they are also working against patriarchy in the same way that feminists are working for patriarchy. So feminism is not just about heterosexual women. Feminism is for practically everybody who understands patriarchy as a structure of oppression. It can be gay, it can be lesbian, it can be bisexual, transgender, or a heterosexual man. Feminism is for everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, Arpita Jagulia writes, Sir, do you think queer identities that are performed online by the implicit means of posting articles about political or social issues challenge heteronormativity? If it does, then to what extent? In considering Kaufman's assertion of self-presentation, which itself is performative act, does this virtual visibility question heteronormativity?
Oh yes, it does. I think it does. Not only does it question heteronormativity. Thank you again. Really brilliant question. Yes, it does. And also remember that we have something called cyber feminism, right? So therefore, I think it is extremely important for us to harness the tremendous power that the cyberspace has given us, the tremendous power that technology has given us to push through the feminist project, the queer project, as energetically as possible. And so therefore, posting articles. Why only posting articles? Even when you are posting selfies of yourself, I think sometimes posting selfies can be a political act. Have you considered that? Maybe that is something that you should consider too. So posting a selfie is a very political act. If your self-presentation is non-normative, if your self-presentation is something that people normally disapprove of, then the fact that you're constantly posting these selfies is a very powerful political act because what you're doing is, in the words of one of my favorite disability theorists, Leonard J. Davis, you are disrupting the visual field. You are introducing a kind of difference. You're introducing a kind of variety that people are usually not used to seeing. So I think that the cyberspace is a limitless space, and it is a space full of possibilities. And I think that it's a wonderful platform where you can perform your anti-patriarchal politics.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is by Manvi Tandon. If the penis or vagina aren't in themselves male or female sexual organs, then why would a trans person go for a surgery to get the genitalia that is associated with what they identify as?
Oh, brilliant question. I think that, remember that again, how we perceive of our bodies is not uniform. So therefore, there is a certain idea of a male body that we may have. There is another certain idea of a female body that we may have. So therefore, there's just as there are trans women who have gone for gender sex reassignment surgery, to get a breast and to get a vagina. There are other trans women who have resolutely refused to go for sex reassignment surgery, right? So therefore, there are several kinds of transgender people, and also so there is a way in which we can complicate. We can introduce variety into our understanding of the trans body by saying that not all trans women are going to have the same kind of body, not all trans men are going to have the same kind of body, Because you must remember, there is this very famous case, I'm sure you know about this. I think it happened in 2014, when in Ecuador, you have this trans man and this trans woman, you remember, who got married, and they had children. They had a son, I think. Well, a child at any rate. I'm not sure about the sex of the baby. But remember that this baby was conceived by the father. The baby was conceived by the father, and the father was impregnated by the semen of the mother. So do you see? So over here, the mother has the penis, and she has sex with the father. The father has the ovaries, and so the mother gives birth to the child. So do you see that there is not one kind of trans body? There are several trans bodies. Some trans bodies think of the penis as male, okay, no problem. Some trans bodies think of the vagina as female, okay, no problem. But then there are other trans persons who also think of the penis as a part of the female body, and they think of the vagina as a part of the male body. So my point in saying this is that, do you see that therefore the penis or the vagina no longer has a fixed sex to it? It never had it, but now it has just become much more visible. So now we know that there is no biological sex.
Thank you, so. Amita Mandal writes, so do you think that just creating a law can normalize the presence of LGBT community in rigidly heterosexual and patriarchal Indian society?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question.
So do you think that just creating a law can normalize the presence of LGBT community in rigidly heterosexual and patriarchal Indian society?
Well, I think the law has got tremendous psychological value. I think that is something that we really have to understand. Quite apart from what other basically changes it can bring about in society, law has got tremendous psychological value. And law also has it has a certain kind of cultural value as well. Because remember that after 6th of September 2018, there is a lot more presence of LGBT persons in popular culture than there was before. And also, I think there was this very peculiar sort of interregnum kind of period where so homosexuality was criminalized from 1860 to 2009, and then suddenly in 2009 it became legal, and then there were magazines that were published, there were books that were released, there were films that were made. So there was this sort of brief period of sort of queer effervescence, LGBT effervescence that happened between 2009 and 2013, and then suddenly in 2013 homosexuality was criminalized again. And so from 2013 to 2018, for those 5 years, suddenly, there were very few representations of LGBT sort of persons. And now, of course, since 2018, it's opened up. So therefore, it has got tremendous cultural value as far as popular culture is concerned. A lot more teachers are now talking about LGBT issues than they probably would have done if it was still criminalized. Society is changing, so I think the law has got tremendous psychological value, and I think, but of course, but this is where I think this is what I wanted to talk about initially, is that the Supreme Court verdict. I'm very glad that this person asked me the question about law, because that helps me to talk about something that I had intended to talk about today initially, which is that even when Supreme Court verdict, we were all celebrating it, I was very troubled that in the Supreme Court verdict there was constantly talk of love. And now, of course, we know that love is love. It is something that everybody is very, very happy with. When Shubh Jada Savdhan was being released, Ayushman Khurrana and Jitendra Kumar, they were, especially Ayushman Khurrana, he was sporting T-shirts that said "Love is Love" with the rainbow kind of stripes on it. So therefore, in a very peculiar way, "Love is Love" seems to have caught on as this way in which we can render LGBT identities respectable, right? The gentrification of the LGBT identity. Oh, these people are also capable of love. As if being capable of love gives you a certain kind of validity that having sex will not give you. So therefore, instead of calling it, sex is sex or lust is lust, which is what the verdict was especially about, we have actually, again, patriarchy has appropriated it and made it about love. 377 was never about love, it was about sex. But this gentrification of sex into love is something that I find very, very troublesome. And I think the law, in spite of its best intentions, still became patriarchal. Because now law is saying, yes, two men or two women now have the right to love each other. Love was never decriminalized. I mean, love was never criminalized. It was the sexual activity that was criminalized. So this constant recirculation of love is love, I think, is how patriarchy is kind of disciplining the queer.
Thank you so much, sir. Mohit Rai asks, so why is it that usually in a paper on literature and gender, it is chiefly women writing which occupies a major space, whereas men's studies and queer literature is usually missing? Also, what are the challenges that queer literature faces in finding a room in the UG and PG syllabus of English departments? Do you think homophobia runs down even in departments of English, where professors usually avoid such topics by calling themselves old school persons?
Wow! The short answer to your question is yes. Academia is, predominantly homophobic. Academia is predominantly transphobic. Academia is predominantly patriarchal. And you're absolutely right that when in gender studies, we invariably only talk about women, not just women. As I just found out, as I was saying in the introduction, it isn't just women. It is about heterosexual married women. So it isn't even just women. It's about women and motherhood. It's always heterosexual women. So this is exactly my point. Is if you are going to talk about gender, but if your discussion of gender is only going to be about heterosexual married women who have 3 children, then this is not the feminism that I want. Feminism is a far more generous politics. It is a far more inclusive politics. It has got a far wider scope than simply representing sort of married heterosexual women. So you have absolutely very correctly identified the problem that patriarchy has turned gender into something about heterosexual married women, whereas it shouldn't be. So that needs to be corrected. But I also believe that the sort of forces in gender should also include sort of other gender identities, other sexualities, because of course sexuality and gender are also sort of, in a certain extent, sort of related to each other. But I also believe that even if you are teaching a so-called women's writing, so if you're going to call a paper women's writing, fine, call it a paper on women's writing. I've got no problems with women's writing. But in your paper, are you including lesbian texts? Because the last time I checked, lesbians are also women. In your paper, are you including texts that talk about women sex workers? Because the last time I checked, women sex workers are also women. In your syllabus, are you also including trans women's narratives? Because if trans women say that they are women, then they are women. So even within a paper that you're calling women's writing, you will have to include other women who are not heterosexual, who are not cis women. Because if you are only going to teach cis heterosexual women in your women's writing paper, then you are counting out a lot of women, and by doing that, you are actually containing the power of feminism. And this kind of containing the power of feminism basically makes your action, you guessed it, patriarchal.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is by Ankita Chatterjee. She says, "Hello, sir. Do you think the way people are adopting coming out as a mode of asserting their sexual identities as gay, lesbian, trans in popular platforms often becomes essentialist in nature and acts quite opposite to the agenda of queer politics? What is your opinion regarding the role of media?"
Well, there are two questions over here. One is, about coming out, and the other is the media. I honestly, I think I'm conflicted. I think on the one hand, I believe that coming out is perhaps somehow essential because the more people come out, the more you reduce the public kind of representation of heterosexuality and other sexualities start to get represented. So I think in that sense, coming out is essential. But I also believe that whether a person wishes to come out or not is absolutely their own personal matter. There are some people who choose not to come out, and I think that should be respected too. I don't think coming out necessarily stabilizes identity. I can see that it can, but there is also a chance that it need not stabilize identity because once you have come out as gay or indeed as lesbian, and then if you fall in love with as a lesbian, if you suddenly fall in love with a man, or as a gay man, if you suddenly find yourself falling in love with a woman, then I think, and if you then talk about that too, that too I think is very essential because then you are basically saying, look, yes, I used to be gay, but now I'm in love with a woman, and you should be able to accept that too. Or I was a lesbian, and now I'm in love with a man, and you should be able to accept that too. So I think if we start coming out as sexual beings, but if we also try to attach the caveat that yes, I am identifying myself as gay or lesbian today, but it may change, then I think identities may not be so solidified. So I think we should constantly try to factor in the possibility of change in our gender identities or in our sexual identities. As far as the role of the media is concerned, media is by default patriarchal. So media is always going to try and stabilize identity. The media is basically media is in love with stable identity. So I think queer theory and queer practice has got a real challenge in constantly holding the media to account and reminding the media. I don't think the media understands that as yet. But to tell the media that, just because somebody is gay today does not mean that they'll be gay tomorrow. But I don't think media has been able to figure that out yet. So we'll have to give the media some time. But media is patriarchal by default.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, the next question is by Kasturi Das. Sir, could you please elaborate the title of your talk? I guess it's about valorization of different sexualities in terms of love, which makes sexuality outside marriage love something unethical or indecent. And even I would like to add my question here. Sir, we mainly observe that in social media, we find that there have been now so many posts in in ways of memes or something that normalize the things that we study in our textbooks right now. So what we study, we find in our memes right now. So it has been like the post-structuralism, the elitist mode of post-structuralism has been deconstructed in form of popular social media. But sir, I think that those posts are can only be solved and can only be understood by those people who have already read and who already understands that. As such, my friend who comes from science background and everything, they do not really follow those, and though they don't really believe in those posts. They think of it as a comedy or as a medium of humor. So, if you like to elaborate. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Well, of course, I have explained the title of my presentation just now is that I have a great problem with this particular love is love hashtag, because I think love is love is actually a way of gentrifying, rendering respectable sexual activity. So I think sentimentalization of sex is something that patriarchy does very well, and I think we should be a little careful. Um, lest we sentimentalize sex, because if we do that, then we are unconsciously becoming patriarchal. So therefore, I'm simply saying that it is already, it is very well to say that you know. I can't love somebody, I can't have sex with somebody unless I love them. If that is the way you function, that is no problem. If you think that in your head you cannot dissociate love from sex or sex from love, fine, you can do that. But you then cannot go about asking other people to do the same. So you cannot then go about telling other people, how can you have sex with a person if you don't love them? So therefore, love and sex may coincide, it may not coincide, and it is this not coinciding which I think I'm much, much more interested in. As far as the memes that are concerned, how it is, how what we are studying in textbooks is now becoming more and more available in social media. Yes, I think that is a good thing, but you're absolutely right that it seems to be a case of preaching to the converted. Those who have read that stuff are appreciating those memes. Those from the science background think that it's a joke. The way in which you can, and if there are some of my university students who are here, they will be able to tell you that those who live in the hostels, because in hostels you're very often you're living with people from science background, engineering background, and all of that. In hostels, my students of new gender studies, they have actually started to have conversations with their friends from the science background. I would ask you to have more of these conversations. I know that it is going to be very, very, very difficult, because you must understand that they have been trained in a certain kind of patriarchy, and it is very difficult for them to get decolonized, as it were. But I think that the effort should continue, have more conversations, and I'm sure that they'll come around to understanding what you're trying to say.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question is by Swati Tanaya. So, with the increasing in numbers of fluid and plural identities under the gender spectrum, the fact that the spectrum itself is not all inclusive, is it really possible to theorize gender?
No, I think the spectrum is very, very inclusive. I think the spectrum is becoming more and more and more inclusive, which is why I think it is this sort of infinite expanse, which I think is the most wonderful thing about it. Because we remember that now people do not talk about LGBT anymore. They talk about LGBTQAI plus, right? So therefore, it is the plus sign that I would want to focus on. Plus, which means addition, which means accretion, which means inclusivity. So think about the plus as an open embrace. Think about the plus as think of the plus as that emoji of the embrace that you have of the face with the two hands like that. The plus is like that. So therefore, the plus is constantly trying to embrace more and more and more different gender presentations, different gender identities, different sexualities, which is why we now have terms such as neutrois, lipsexual, androphile, gynophile. There are so many other terms that are now being coined. And these are being coined, not outside of queer theory, but very much a part of queer theory. Because, everybody has understood that this is not some box, it is the ocean. And everybody has got the right to swim in that ocean. Just as you cannot contain the ocean, you cannot contain queer theory.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir Kumari Ruchi writes, as you said that a politically aware gay or lesbian will be a feminist generally. But when I read R. Raja Rao's The Boyfriend, I can automatically feel hatred for women emanating from the book. Female characters Female character is shown as some sort of evil or more like a fungus. What's your take on this?
Well, I will simply say that I probably share I probably share your disquiet as far as that particular novel is concerned. Yes, you detected misogyny. I detected misogyny too, and I also detected casteism. So I detected misogyny and casteism. So I think it is a very very troubling book. But again, this goes to show that just because you are gay does not mean that you will be a feminist. And this actually bears it out. So maybe there are, and it is very, very common, this is something that a lot of women, a lot of lesbians have pointed out, that in many, many gay men, there is a lot of misogyny. There is a lot of transphobia. So therefore, these things are going to be there. So they are. Therefore, I'm sorry to say that they haven't really understood feminism, or maybe they don't believe in feminism at all. That is what I'm forced to say. But I am absolutely in agreement with you that it's a very disturbing book. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. So the next question is by Priyanka ma'am. She says, with reference to the question of the heterosexual nature academic, I would like to ask you regarding the mushroom growth of gender studies, women's studies departments in Indian universities. As I may phrase it, the curious case of gender studies department in Indian academics. Most oftenly, they are reluctant to talk about anything beyond what is considered normative and are more restricting than actually trying to bring in the fluidity.
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, I think this is more of a comment than a question, and I completely agree with you. And I think that's a real problem. And I think this is where sort of teachers who identify politically as queer, I think this is where the teachers need to make their cases heard a little bit more forcefully at that board of studies meeting. They need to get the syllabus approved, in which they're teaching texts that are queer, teaching texts that are sort of non-normative or anti-normative. Teachers have a huge responsibility. I have to say that I have been very lucky. I have been incredibly lucky. When I started to teach my paper, New Gender Studies, at Kalyani University in 2009, there was absolutely no opposition from my faculty at all. I wasn't even there at the board of studies meeting where the course was approved. I wasn't even there. I had typhoid at the time, so I was unwell. I was at home, and they still approved it. I didn't have to be there. So I have been incredibly lucky. But I also understand that I have been lucky, but other faculty members in other universities or colleges may not be so lucky. It's a struggle, but I think we have to push through it. But I agree, I completely agree with you.
Thank you, sir. Sir,
Uh, just a second. Niladri, I know that it's already 1.5 hours, right?
It is extraordinary, isn't it?
It's already 1.5 hours.
How many more questions are left?
I mean, it's endless. I mean, then I have to order dinner for you there at your table.
I think so. Just call Swiggy, and I'll give you I'll have to give you my address, and you can give me
and my participants will also kill me that this person is crazy, goes on, right? So what I will just take a couple of questions because Niladri, as I said that I want you next time as well, right?
Sure.
So it should not be the condition. No, no. Vivek is going to screw me up for 2 hours. I have other I have other important things to do. So see, with all to all my participants, I know that like Ananya is saying that this question is important and all questions are important. All questions are important because it is a question which are troubling the mind of our students.
I know.
So as long as any question trouble the mind of our students, they are important questions, right?
Correct.
So
I think what can be done is if you can just sort of give the students my email address,
yes,
because now I realize that it is impossible for me to answer all the questions right now. Let them email them their questions, and I will certainly try and answer them.
yeah, and I'm also it's like see if it's I have no I mean, don't think that I'm not letting other person to ask the questions, but it seems that there are certain questions are very diverse, right? Where the Niladri has to talk more about some other things to explain the points.
Yeah,
So because we have to fix it up that what we need it right now by aligning with the topic which he has suggested us, right? So I mean, it's not right that Niladri is the one who is going to answer anything that is under the sky, right? So please, it's my request. Don't feel that we are excluding any questions. It is just that only they are more diverse and they need more time to explain properly, right?
correct.
So thank you. So Agrima, ask one more question and then
Yeah, and then I think we can conclude. Yeah.
yeah, we will wrap it up. Yeah.
Yes, so thank you. So the last question is by Kishan Mishra. So both lesbian and gay relationship are also kind of heterosexual relationship in a way when two people are in lesbian or gay relationship. One of them play the role of male while the other play the role of female. Then why we are categorizing all these? How do you look at the issue?
No, I think there is a basic misunderstanding of gay and lesbian relationships. No, I'll respectfully ask you to perhaps change your opinion regarding gay relationships and lesbian relationships. No, they are. Now, I think I would strongly recommend that you read a book by Judith Butler called Gender Trouble, in which she makes it very, very clear that there is a way in which heteronormativity is sort of imposed on gay and lesbian relationships. I think that imposition is perhaps not a very good idea. And even when two men is claiming to be, one is claiming to be a husband and the other is claiming to be a wife, I don't think it is a replication of heterosexuality at all. Because I think heterosexuality presumes that there is going to be one penis and a vagina, and over here there are two penises. So therefore, far from reinforcing heterosexuality, it is actually revealing heterosexuality to be a performance. So therefore, that is something which you really should be concentrating on. Gay people do not wish to mimic heterosexual relationships, neither do lesbians. So I think a good reading of Judith Butler's Gender Trouble will perhaps sort out the matter for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, can we have one last question?
Yes.
Sir, Gaurav Singh writes, do you perceive post-feminism and post-queer as a right-wing mechanism, narrative, deeply embedded in the patriarchy to disempower and dismantle the feminist and queer project?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. No, I think I do agree with you. I do not understand what is post-feminism because I think the work of feminism still remains to be done. In fact, I think the kind of situation, the kind of society that we live in right now, feminism has just become even more a necessity. It has become more of a requirement. So I don't think, forget about post-feminism. I think even feminist work needs to be done a lot. And of course, I don't agree with post-queer either. I think that even queer studies and queer theory and queer practice has a very long way to go, and it has still not realized its full political potential. And I think that is something that we still have to practice. So no, I do not agree with the category of post-feminism. I do not agree with the category of post-queer. I think feminist queer is, I believe, going to be here for quite some time now, and necessarily so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So you have answered all the questions very wonderfully. And
Am I passed?
yes, sir, so it was very wonderful and very enlightening. And now I invite Visakhi to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you so much.
Once again, I know there are a lot of questions left. Please excuse us for now. Gaurav, as you said that, like Gaurav has written a comment that it is a controversial question and that is why extremely relevant and should be addressed. Uh, it is also good that controversial questions should be addressed by your own, right? It's not like asking the person to put it to the crisis, but anyway. So it's more like what is more important. What we are doing is more important to understand that how to go with these issues, right, and how to do research as well,
Yes,
right?
and also to practice it in your own life.
Yes, and open the possibilities. Okay, thank you so much. So please, don't mind anyone else that he didn't ask my question or organizers are bad. Please,
So they can email me.
yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I invite Aryaputriji to deliver the vote of thanks.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. I don't know where you are, but yes, you are audible.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you, Agrima, for this good chance. A very good evening, everyone. I Putri, on behalf of Intersections B.H.U, extend a very sincere vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this lecture such a great success. First and foremost, I would like to express our deep sense of gratitude to our chief speaker, Professor Niladri Chatterjee, sir, for having been graciously consented to participate in this event despite his busy schedule. Thank you, sir, for your thought-provoking talk on love is love, disciplining queerness through social media. You discussed concepts like queer need not necessarily be a sexual identity, but is political, trans bodies, and how patriarchy is disciplining queer. Your content today would echo in our minds for a long time to come. Thank you, sir. I express gratitude to Dr. Vivek Singh, sir, for motivating and inspiring us in all possible ways. Thank you, sir. A special vote of thanks to everyone here for blessing this online platform with their presence. Once again, I thank one and all present here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope to see many of you sometime in the near future. And thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.